Close your eyes. Let's do an imagination exercise together. If I ask you to picture the heavy metal fandom, you probably imagine long hair, leather jackets, black t-shirts, and people raising their horns up in the air, right? If we were to talk about punks, the first thing that comes to mind probably is brightly colored hair, band tees, and combat boots. And if we talk about the brony fandom, needless to say, you can imagine people dressing in suits of their favorite characters and bumping their hoops with each other. It's easy to imagine these fandoms because most of them have a common foundation from the beginning, and while they have evolved during the years, the core visual elements stay the same. Okay, you can open your eyes now. Hope you haven't cheated. Because this isn't the case for all fandoms. There is one that changed completely over the years. A fandom that was started by extroverted amateur delinquents, loud bikes and embroidered jackets symbolizing the temporary beauty of their world. And somewhere along the line it was taken over by the complete opposite. By introverted otaku, alternative fashion clothing and a deep love for fantasy world building. And still, they have more in common than you can imagine. While the aesthetic and demographics changed radically over the years, there are still some common threads that unite the souls of both groups. Belonging and self-expression in a society that gives a cold shoulder to anyone different, lost, or without the means for a normal life. Let's talk about the Visual Kei fandom and the delinquents that paved the way for otaku. Picture this, it's the early 90s and bands like X-Japan are at the peak of popularity for the wild shows. Yoshiki setting cymbals on fire, band members breathing fire while singing lyrics with a mix of rebellion and sorrow. As you can imagine, those kinds of shows didn't attract people that were into idol pop music, but instead a whole different crowd. Meet the Yanki culture, the amateur delinquent subculture of the 80s and 90s Japanese youth. The first thing that was outside venues were modified cars and bikes. They were modified with a purpose, to look unique, especially the bikes with custom fairings and straight long exhaust designed to be as loud as possible. The people behind the wheel, or their bar for that matter, often dress with outfits as eccentric as their vehicles. One piece that stands out was the Tokkō-fuku, embroidered jackets. Originally, Pososoku gang members wore them, with details of their gang and territory as a signal of belonging. But they swapped the gang symbols for the name of the band they supported, lyrics and members, because for them it was their belonging too. Women often wore long skirts and uniforms embroidered with kanji and roses, following the sukeban tradition. As you can imagine with this description, these people didn't fit in society, so to speak. They were outcasts in a country that used to be economically booming, and they were left out. Many of them weren't able to finish their education and had to drop out. They would find low-level employment to fund their bikes and clothes and would gather with others like them to go on runs and meetings with their gang. Society looked down upon them, so they became amateur delinquents. Not to make money, but to feel something close to a family. And I know what you're thinking. Delinquents? Why? The relationship is closer than you think. Because they were amateur ones. Hear me out. In my country, being an amateur delinquent means stealing a VMP and get it out to the streets to drift it, endangering other people in the way. But for Yanki culture, these people didn't steal for a living. They had honor codes and a rich inner world. To the point, they would write poems as expressions of friendship, loyalty and love. For them, being part of that subculture was something that had an expiration date before they committed to being adults. It was a fleeting moment of rebellion, something so precious that wouldn't last forever. Someday they would have to graduate, hang their jackets and move on from that life. That was something that could be appreciated in some of their Tokkō-fuku motifs, with the classic expressions of mono no aware, like waves and cherry blossoms, temporary precious moments of freedom that won't last forever. So when bands like X-Japan, Backtick and Lunacy came to the stage, with extreme looks and lyrics that mix rebellion, sorrow and pain, they went crazy. Yankees adopted this music and brought their own culture to it. They would gather outside venues in circles doing rally screams. Inside, they would organize themselves by hierarchies and status to determine things like who would be closer to the stage. Seniority and commitment determined the social standing there, just like in their gangs. And from there, the first defined Visual Kei Fandom was born. Since most of the fans at the time were women, one could say this was also the birth of the bangyas, or bandhyarus, the female fandom with a rich tradition and the whole staple to this subculture to this day. During this era, the bands grew and things evolved. Bangyas began to follow their favorite bands all over Japan to see as many lives as they could, and some even started to ditch the sukeban looks to cosplay band members. They fell in love with their rebellion against the establishment, and bands corresponded too, because after all, they were still outcasts, even if they had low-paying jobs to support their fan activities, and their bands were starting to become popular. They were still looked down upon. Bands fought hard to help them to be recognized by society, not as freaks or delinquents, but as humans. As the late X-Japan guitarist Hide said, "If we appear on Kohaku, the fans who support us won't be looked at as strange by society anymore. I thought that by appearing on Kohaku, we could give our fans citizenship in the wider world." And as their bands grew, it seemed they were starting to become more accepted, but it was something fleeting too. In 1997, X-Japan disbanded after one final concert after tens of thousands of people. One filled with emotional screams from their fans. And if you pay attention to the recording, you can see how Toshi, singer, had his cheeks wet too. He couldn't contain his tears behind his sunglasses either. Imagine what that meant for all of them, fans and the band. Japan's working class found a way to escape from their problems for a little while, to have support from their newfound family and to relieve their stress at concerts, only to have their biggest band to disband. Their members lived some really tragic stories after that, but that's a story for another night. That marked the turning point for the symbiosis between Visual Kei and Yanki culture. Most people move on. Some stop being delinquents and move on into adult life, getting a partner, having kids, trying to get a better financial situation despite having little to no formal education. Others move on to different types of music and activities, and the Visual Kei Delinquent fandom started to feel empty. Other bands were still supported, of course, but not to the same extent and not within the same worldview of amateur delinquents. That faded. What came next? Something no one expected. While X-Japan was arriving to their end, other bands were emerging, and they took the meaning of Visual Kei to a different level by creating new subgenres. Bands like X, Backtick, and Lunacy were defined by dark, menacing aesthetics that adopted goth and punk elements and made them their own. So what came next? Androgyny and cross-dressing blurring the lines of gender presentation, the phenomenon of departing from black clothing. In the mid and late 90s, two bands with unique concepts became popular and shaped the next wave: Shazna and Malice Mizer. On one hand, Shazna became the next band to go mainstream. They appeared constantly on TV, had their faces plastered everywhere on the streets, and were really charismatic with the general audiences. They played bright pop music and had really feminine presentation on stage, which attracted new eyes to the scene, not so broad casual fans and a younger demographic. On the other one, Malice Mizer did something that was the opposite in some sense. They arrived to the scene with complex music and extravagant outfits in a world that resembled medieval European aristocracy, bringing a different fandom that was interested in the theatrical presentation, atmosphere, and world building. If you think about these descriptions, these two bands represent a huge contrast, but feature the same demographic: otaku culture, manga and anime fans. Shazna was a really soft band, while previous bands had also androgynous presentations, but they were imposing in comparison. Isam, the singer, would style his hair in a feminine way and dress with pastel colors. He looked like a character straight out from an anime. Seriously, if you put him in a sailor uniform, he would pass as a senshi from Sailor Moon. What? Prove me wrong. I'll die on this hill. Meanwhile, Malice Mizer crafted a medieval European goth universe since the early 90s, with castles, historical couture, and androgynous aristocratic figures, while mixing castanets, harpsichords, and organs with guitars, bass, and drums. High fashion and darkly romantic vision of what anime fans already loved. That combined with the mainstream success of bands like Lei and Le Arc-en-Ciel who attract immense attention to the scene crafted a new paradigm. Different forms of expression when it comes to gender representation and fashion, and the birth of complex world building. Before Shazna and Malice Mizer became popular, you think about it, everyone had a different image. Sure, it followed X-Japan's slogan, psychedelic violence crime of visual shock, but they were built around the same concepts of aggressive presentations, dark but more formal clothing, and the more daring musicians they would adopt something more colorful, but it was still menacing in comparison. Along with that, there was little lore or world building. There were more ways to shock people than what was already established by them. That was something Yanki culture was fine with. But if you, like me, have grown watching anime and reading manga, it means that magic spark that lets you wonder about a different reality, where you take the health of the performer and step in the reality. The ability of showing your inner world and freely expressing yourself to others. And like us, the Otaku fandom from that time also noticed it quickly. Thanks to the TV show Breakout, which was dedicated mainly to Visual Kei during this era, everyone got a chance to discover these bands. For the first time, there was a dedicated spotlight on TV, and back in the day, it was the dominant media, bringing Visual Kei into the living rooms of people who had never voluntarily engaged with it, including the otaku audience who watched music TV casually. This created the image where artists were also celebrities, presenting them as fantastical and beautiful figures. For the old guard, this felt like betrayal. The scene they knew slowly faded away while the new era was being marketed on TV pop shows. But for the right audience, the otaku fandom, it was something precious. After seeing these bands on TV for the first time, fanzines that published fan-made content about manga and anime started publishing submissions of doujinshis and fanarts about Visual Kei bands. They went wild with them. Having exposure on TV and the otaku crowd making art about them created a whole new fandom, one that never left the scene and brought many changes. The old fandom was an extrovert one, doing war cries outside venues before concerts, and using them as physical relief, something that was derived from sports culture. But otaku culture is quite the opposite. It's introverted by nature, so live concerts changed radically. While headbangs remained, violent acts were replaced by furitsuke, collective performances where fans would learn specific movements with their head and body for each song. To cheer for musicians, they started using glow sticks, and they even waited outside for the band before and after shows, all traits inherited from the idol fandom. And at home, it showed even more. Yanki culture was social. Gangs had meetings, they went outside to ride their bikes and race their cars on the streets. But otaku culture, as I said, it's naturally introverted. At home, people spent hours making fan arts and doujinshis about their favorite bands. They began collecting merch, to the point people would keep going to shows just to get limited edition releases, and with those items they would do shrines for their oshis. Those who got a PC and access to the internet back in the day would make fan pages in plain HTML, coded by hand or with primitive software as a tribute to their favorite bands. To put it in short, Yankees cultivated social relationships, the otaku crowd, their inner world, one where they adopted the word and lore of their favorite bands, cementing the current fandom. This was the golden age of this subculture, and it showed by how invested the fandom was back then, especially bangyas. The culture shifted into something even deeper. Because being introverted doesn't mean being antisocial. Bangyas evolved too in the otaku era. Outside the appearances changed. Instead of suke-band, they would cosplay band members or dress in alternative fashion, like Gothic Lolita, to attend lives. They still inherited the Yanki hierarchy. Seniority and access to bands were still significant and were big parts in determining someone's status in the scene. But they added something new: the hunger for learning everything about bands. Knowledge became social currency and a big sign of status. In the Yankee fandom, prestige came from physical presence and aggressive commitment. In the Otaku fandom, it was about knowing everything about bands, from lineups to conceptual arcs and the meaning of lyrics. The most respected bangyas became walking encyclopedias of the genre. One example of this would be the bangya that ended being a Visual Kei mogul herself, Tomomi Osaki, the president and founder of PS Company. During this time, there was also a big shift for bangyos, the male fandom. In the Yankee era, most men related to aggression and transgression, but in the otaku era, fewer men could relate to bands. The few that stayed because they liked the music, the world building, and admired the scene caused an interesting phenomenon. A significant number of bangyos became Visual Kei musicians themselves. Like some members of Golden Bomber, they grew admiring the subculture, so they became a part of it. But even with all these shifts, the scene and its fandom were still haunted by the ghosts of the past. Visualize this with me. Visual Kei bands are everywhere. The four Heavenly Kings are selling out all shows. Bands are featured on TV. The streets of Harajuku are plastered with band posters. The whole subculture was even perfectly turned along the general sentiment at the end of the century, the whole end of the world concept. So you could think Visual Kei would finally have citizenship in the broader world, right? Would make total sense. Final vindication, the subculture goes mainstream, everyone loves it, end of the story, and everyone's happy. But, well, something weird happened. Visual Kei as a subgenre became well known but not well accepted among the general public. This subculture became enormous and commercially dominant, but still some music retailers in Japan refused to stock those albums. Some music critics that took Western indie music seriously often dismissed Visual Kei as a pop phenomenon. Even some magazines refused to acknowledge the scene for years. It was a psychological double bind for Golden Age fans. It was well known but also treated as lowbrow and laughable. Yankee culture made a first bad impression to the mainstream audience. Even if X-Japan finally appeared on Kohaku, for some, there were still delinquents with too much makeup. And when the otaku audiences came, they were looked down on for being too girly. From there, the golden age began to fade as the new millennium entered and the mainstream audiences fell off and the Visual Kei Ice Age began. To some, this era was a fad about alternative expression, but for the otaku bangyas, unlike the Yankee culture which has an expiration date, being an otaku is something permanent. Maybe you don't feel the same intensity and passion as you once had for this fandom, because as you age, life gets on. You can't keep up with the things you love as often and excitement grows old, but still, it's always there. There is something really interesting here. For the otaku crowd, they were still committed, even if the most bright part had passed and their lives moved on. As life started demanding new things, they would still keep up with bands, find new ones to enjoy, try to attend concerts and support them when they could. Even if the mainstream world realized Visual Kei wasn't for them, otaku bangyas kept supporting the whole scene. Thanks to them, the scene kept evolving. The Ice Age came to an end, as Europeans discovered this wonderful subculture in the early 2000s thanks to anime, forums and the bands that dared to ring here who found new allies and fill up venues. Then the Americas came, and the rest is history. We owe them so much for that, and I'll always be incredibly grateful to them. If it weren't for their support, there wouldn't be more Visual Kei bands to this day. Even former Yankees kept their own culture alive. When X-Japan reunited after a hiatus that lasted about a decade, they filled whole stadiums once again, with the adults that used to be amateur delinquents, letting them remember their teenage years once again. Honestly, each of those things deserve a video of their own. The Ice Age, how Visual Kei found a huge unexpected alive in Europe where things were looking rough for the scene in Japan. Bands like Buxiles leaned on that like geniuses. How Latin America became one of the most important places for this subculture. How the music evolved too. But those stories deserve their own nights too. For now, let's close this one. From introspective amateur delinquents with a rich inner world, writing poems about love, friendship and loyalty, living the embodiment of Mono no Aware, to otakus drawing fan art of band members and becoming living encyclopedias of the subculture we love. There is a common thread here, have you noticed? Yankees were loud and raw while otakus are calmer, but both of them found something to take to their hearts. Self-expression, finding a true self, who you are and what you enjoy within the umbrella of a subculture that embraces that with open arms. Something so small as makeup became leverage to be able to look how they wanted. Anyone could become beautiful, no matter where they came from or how they look without it. To try different clothing styles as a way of expressing themselves. To find a family of people that were also looking for their own identity in a world that often rejects and isolates those who live outside the mold without a trust fund to back it. These people were outcasts and found amazing artists and an incredible world of wonder and rebellion in front of them, upon a stage, and they took the reins to be a part of it, not as spectators but as participants. They bloomed and found a place to belong because of it. Something amazing, don't you think? I hope you enjoyed this story. I'm V and I have been your host for the night. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. Until we meet again.